Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome to Business Unusual. This is a live show where we talk about the changing nature of work. I'm Susie Jackson. I'm a news editor at LinkedIn, coming to you live from my home in New York City. On the show today, we are going to talk about living with uncertainty. Coronavirus immediately and drastically changed the way we live our lives and run our businesses. In the early days, without much trusted information, we hunkered down in quarantine and tried to adjust to not having all the answers. Now the country is opening back up, even as reported cases rise in certain areas. It's becoming clear that living our lives and managing our businesses through this uncertainty is going to be constant. We are not going to have all the answers. We don't have a vaccine yet we are being asked to move forward. If you're a frontline worker, you have been dealing with uncertainty the whole time this pandemic has been affecting us. If you're not a frontline worker, I'm wondering, is your place of business expecting you to come back into the office or into your place of business anytime soon? How are you thinking through that development? There's a lot of questions around how to do that safely. Since we're not going to have all the information and the assurances that we would like, I'm wondering on the show today if we can talk about things that we might do to change our approach to how we think about living through and managing uncertainty to navigate it better. I want to hear from you throughout the show today. How have you adjusted your routines in the face of changing information? What feels safe to you? What doesn't? How do you balance those two things? What do you feel like you need to have more confidence in going back about your daily life? To talk about this, I want to bring on my guest today. Laura Huang is a professor at the Harvard Business School. She researches both adversity and uncertainty. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Susie. Such a pleasure to be with you.
It is a beautiful day here on the East Coast. It's a nice way to kick off the Monday. Phase 2 is starting in New York City today, so opening is starting back up. That means something different, no matter where you are in the country. It's not certain though. You know, some restaurants are going to start opening. People have to figure out ways to go about their lives now that things have changed. I'm curious, Laura, why is this all so jarring? Uncertainty is not new. You can never really predict the future, but why does everything collectively feel so acutely different?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when we think about uncertainty, we have a couple of handholds that allow us to deal with that uncertainty. And in this condition and in this state of affairs, this is something that we didn't expect. We had a lot of momentum going into this. We were getting through the beginning of the year. We were going through things at work, in our own personal lives. And then all of a sudden, it was very jarring, as you mentioned. And so a lot of times what happens when things are really jarring is that the first thing we do when we are faced with adversity or uncertainty is we sort of look and see what everyone else is doing. And we try and take cues from other people. And in this instance, it was no one really felt like they were under control. Everyone sort of felt like this was a new type of adversity, different types of adversity. Some people were facing it physically, some mentally, some emotionally, some financially, some professionally, some all at the same time. And when we do follow others without having a good enough grasp on our own, that's when things like hoarding of toilet paper or everyone baking banana bread at the same time starts to happen.
Thank you, Laura. I want to say hi to some people joining us in the stream already. We have Renata from Vancouver. Welcome to the show. David from California. Marie from Pittsburgh. Thank you for joining us. We're on with Harvard Business School professor Laura Huang. We're talking about uncertainty and adversity. So, Laura, we're looking to cues from other people, but no one actually knows what's going on or what the right thing to do is. And we're all alone. So I'm wondering, how has isolation contributed to making this even more difficult to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, the isolation piece is another, even people who are sort of feeling like they are supported or that they do have ways that they can grapple with this, that isolation piece is another variable. You change one variable in any sort of situation that you're in and everything kind of changes. And so now it's a lot of the things that we have been used to or the ways that we've gone about business or the ways that we've gone about our lives has really changed. And we've had to think with a big shift because we've had to make that sort of leap. And so what sort of happens is that we don't have the same mental prototypes and schemas and ways that we've been thinking about these different types of mental models that allow us to think about uncertainty in ways that we've been able to do so in the past. In the past, we had ways of dealing with stress or uncertainty or adversity. And now we have to come up with new strategies, and not only come up with new strategies, but test those. And when we're testing those in isolation, we don't get all of the same information or all of the same cues that we did before. And that makes it even more difficult for us to actually know what steps to take.
Yeah, so we have to gather all this new information, but also sometimes there's not enough information. So we have to come up with these new strategies. But what do you recommend when some certain information just isn't going to be available? There's various information out there about coronavirus and how long it lasts on certain surfaces and in what concentrations and how much you should be in a room with someone or touch this or touch that. And it starts to become really overwhelming. It's both too much information and also not enough quality information. So how do you kind of calm your brain and sort that out and find a way through that feels manageable?
Yeah, when you have all of this information, right? This is like we feel like we have information overload, and not only are we overloaded with information, but the information doesn't always jive with each other, right? On the one hand, we were initially hearing things like, don't wear masks, masks don't actually work. And now we're hearing like, you must wear a mask, everyone is mandated to wear masks. We have not only a lot of information, but conflicting information. And in these instances, what I find in a lot of my research is that the number one thing to do is go back to the basics, like go back to those basic goods. So in a lot of my research, what I find is that a lot of times we try and look for more and more and more, right? Companies that are trying to grow and scale look to go bigger and better. But the best thing to do in these situations is to prune, right? You need to be able to prune to grow. So if you think about like a tree, for example, as a tree tries to grow taller and taller and make progress, you need to be pruning away the things that are not necessary. And so in these instances, we have to go back to like, what are the basic things? For example, if it's in our careers, what are the 3 basic things that we can be delivering on a day-to-day basis? Or if it's in our families, what are the 3 main things that we need to be providing in our family? And as you sort of get a sense for what those look like and how to deal with that in terms of the type of information that's coming, that's how you're able to then continue to make progress. Because the problem here is right away when we sort of were faced with this pandemic, as I sort of mentioned, we did have a lot of momentum, and we were trying to figure out how we continue along that momentum. But in fact, we had a complete shift where we had a different starting point. And so we need to sort of think with a different mindset. And so, a lot of the work that I've done with small businesses, for example, small businesses and entrepreneurial firms, they're really good at sort of pivoting and dealing with some types of adversity and some types of disadvantages or some types of uncertainty. They kind of tweak little things and change them. But here, this is a really different kind of circumstance. You also see large companies who are so used to what their bread and butter is, and they're not used to tweaking things, right? So I was looking at Disney, for example, and Disney is this company which all of a sudden, like, movies aren't coming out, all of their theme parks are being closed, they're losing massive amounts of money. And I sort of said in passing, like, they need to think like entrepreneurs of a really small startup company. They need to think like, hey, we should be Zoom bombing people with our Disney characters. We should be doing things that really change and reframe and shift the way we do things, that are surprising and counterintuitive, that allow us to be making small steps in different directions.
I hope Disney's listening, because I think my kids really enjoy that development. That sounds like a great way. You're talking about getting back to basics. If you're an entertainment company, how can you entertain people given all the rules that used to do that have changed?
Yeah, and it's like memorability, right? Disney, so much of their business is based on their brand and people knowing Disney, and not sort of. And so, what are the things that they can be doing? They can't be doing these massive, like, theme parks are closed, movies aren't being released. But how do they sort of stay inside the minds of customers, the minds of supporters? And it's these characters that have stories and narratives and are meaningful. And so at the same time that we are seeing this shift to be online meetings, and we're also seeing all of this Zoom bombing and all these things, like, how delightful would it be if all of a sudden, Disney was doing these sorts of things, where you could take an intermission from a meeting and see Disney characters doing doing, putting on a little skit or singing a song, or, even just entertaining your kids while you're in a meeting. Like, all of these things are ways that we need to think about how to turn adversity into advantage. And in my recent book, even though the title is turning adversity into advantage, part of the problem is that we think about it as advantage and we think about it as opportunities, and it almost makes us feel strange to think about opportunity, because there's this negative connotation where opportunity almost sounds opportunistic, like we're trying to take this devastating time and be opportunistic about it. But in fact, it's really about looking at the inefficiencies, like turning adversity into how do we actually make things more efficient. So instead of thinking about it in terms of opportunities, when we think about it in terms of inefficiencies, that's when we can actually do some pretty amazing things.
That's really interesting. And Mary here in the stream is weighing in to say, thank you for this great conversation. Mary says, I woke up this morning frustrated more than ever about the uncertainties of the pandemic and how they're interfering with our lives, especially for our daughter going into her freshman year of college. She says anxiety sets in and we must abolish it. Tips and suggestions for survival are greatly appreciated. If you're just joining us now, that was a nice comment from Mary. This is Business Unusual. We are talking with Laura Huang, a Harvard Business School professor who researches adversity and uncertainty, about how we can shift our thinking, given that this pandemic is not going away anytime soon. Laura, you just gave us a really interesting example of Disney. Some great free advice for them about how they can reframe the questions around what it is they're trying to provide. I'm wondering if we can reframe those questions at an individual level.
Yeah.
To try to calm our anxieties or find more productive ways of thinking, given, as Mary said, you wake up really anxious because so much is unknown.
Yeah, there's so many things as individuals that we can be doing here. But the first step is really what we're sort of hearing, is that we're all going through this period where we simultaneously, like, we wake up and we're kind of feeling frustrated because we're saying, okay, like, we're sort of impatient and we're done with this. But the coronavirus doesn't really care how impatient we are. This is a reality where we are trying to grapple with something, and every single conversation I start with, I have these conversations around, like, people like, how are you doing, and we ask others how they're doing, and we start off with like, oh, we're doing great, we're so lucky in the grand scheme of things, right? We feel almost guilty to talk about how frustrated or how hard this is, even though we know that people are grappling with this in very, very different ways. And so the first is kind of acknowledging that, acknowledging gratitude and difficulty at the same time, right? We do this in our lives even outside of adversity and the coronavirus. We're able to acknowledge that, yes, we feel like we're happy, and yet we're not content because we're still striving for more. And part of the difficulty here is that we need to be able to practice holding multiple things in our head at the same time. That we are uncomfortable with what's happening, but yet we're still grateful. Or that we're happy, but yet we still want more. Or that so all of these sort of simultaneous things that we can hold in our head help us to be able to think about strategies for going forward. And so what I find is that there's actually 4 steps that in a lot of my research and in my book that I talk about how do we actually deal with obstacles and constraints and adversity, such as the difficulties that we're facing now. How do you actually gain an edge for yourself? And the edge stands for the components of this, the E, D, G, and E. So the first E stands for enrich. Thinking about how you enrich and provide value in any sort of situation that you might be in, right? What are those superpowers that you have? What are those areas in which you have either strengths or underestimated strengths or weak or alleged weaknesses? Because things are very different now. And so every time you're in a different industry or a different set of conditions or with different people, the ways in which your strengths and the values you provide are going to differ. So taking some time to really think about, like, are my strengths, the things that I'm able to provide, are those being utilized in the best possible fashion in my life, in the relationships that I'm having, in the workplace? And when you go back to that, that allows you to sort of see different areas that you might not have seen. The D stands for delight, which is sort of how do you actually crack that door open so that you're able to do that. The G stands for guide, which is guiding situations in different ways. And the final E stands for effort and hard work, which we often think comes first. We think that if you put in that hard work, that the hard work will speak for itself. But in fact, the hard work here comes last because we're in this different situation. So when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your effort and hard work now will go the work the hardest for you, and you won't have that sort of frustration to the same extent.
Yeah, and we've got some folks in the stream talking about their situations. I want to call out Christabel says, I am a healthcare worker and was furloughed. My return date is end of July, but I do not feel confident this will occur. Randy says, as far as us in the military, we are logistically providing all safety measures to mitigate any spread. We are training everyone in the dangers of the virus. Randy says this is raising confidence in our working environment. I think that's interesting. That's not a point of view I've heard before, that actually looking at this in a different way is actually making Randy feel more confident about the working environment. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think like to make this more concrete, like what are actual steps that we can take to actually enrich, delight, guide, and make our hard work harder for us, right? So in the first instance, the first question, right, in terms of like, if you don't feel comfortable going, so a couple of things that I've seen, right? So the first is like, how many times have we said to people like, oh, like next time you're in San Francisco, look me up and we'll have coffee, or next time if you're in New York, right? This is a perfect opportunity. We're not going to be in any of these cities that other people are in anytime soon. So this is a great opportunity to forge those new relationships or reconnect with those people that we weren't able to reconnect with before, where we did rely on these sort of interpersonal and face-to-face interactions. So what I've been advising people is take this opportunity. Who are those people that you wanted to see that were in a different city, but you were always waiting until you had that next trip out there, or you're going to be in a city close to that. This is a time where you can actually be gathering new information about new jobs, about new roles, about new opportunities that are out there. Send them a note and say like, hey, I know I'm not going to be in San Francisco anytime soon, and you're not going to be out here in Boston anytime soon. So let's connect. Let's have a quick call. Let's catch up on what we've been doing. Those sorts of conversations can really help you spot new opportunities. They sort of give you an opportunity to learn new things or to explore options that might not have been available to you before. Another thing is, I had a student, for example, who his offer was rescinded, right? He was graduating and he was set to work in this job. His offer was rescinded, and he was like, okay, well, now what do I do? And I said, okay, well, what is it that you would have wanted to do? Like, this job wasn't perfect. You had concerns with it anyways. And he said to me, well, I've always wanted to try doing something in finance, or maybe in sales, or maybe in customer service. I just didn't have a chance because I didn't have that sort of background. What he's been able to do now is he found 3 separate jobs, one in finance, one in sales, and one in customer service. And he's put those things together, and he's actually now making more money than he was making with just that one job alone. And the reason why is because now people are looking for a lot of more temporary or more short term. There's a lot more jobs that they're hiring for, perhaps for a 15-hour a week rather than a 40-hour a week. And so he was able to take 3 different jobs that were 15 hours a week, add those up together, and make sort of a full-time position for himself. And so if you are furloughed or you have lost your job, seeing this as an opportunity to explore different things, but in smaller bite-sized chunks, can give you those skills so that once we are back into a more normal or a more regular expected type of environment, you've now built up those skills, you've built up that experience, and you can say something about those things in a very different, deeper way.
So I'm hearing remove the feeling of opportunistic from the word opportunity here. And instead of maybe passively taking all this as uncertainty and I'm not sure what to do, look for the options to be more active in little ways here and there. This student has now found 3 different things that's going to lead up to something that's going to be of more use to him than that job that felt uncertain, that wasn't going to happen anyway. We have some folks in the stream who agree with us. We have Marie saying we should stay connected. Reaching out is helping all involved. And Omabola says, absolutely. Seizing opportunities and new ones is a really good time to do that right now. Going back to that, point you were making earlier about when someone asks you, "Are you okay?" and everyone feels like they have to qualify right now with, "Well, I'm fine," considering. You were talking about having to hold two different feelings at the same time. What is a better response than "I'm okay," considering? Like, what's a small step someone could do today when someone asks them, "How are you feeling?"
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we are in these situations where there is a lot of uncertainty, we feel like we need to assert some sort of a confidence, right? That we need to make up for it in some different way. And so there's this balance. There's a continuum between this really. So what I talk a lot about is around like this advocacy versus inquiry, like balancing those two reactions, right? So advocating in terms of like, here's the things that I'm working on, or here's the ways that I'm feeling, versus like this inquiry, which is like, help me understand how you're feeling, or help me understand the circumstances, or help me understand what I'm working on relates to what you're working on. And having this mixture where we also allow ourselves to both be in control and out of control in this very dual way that combines the two, right? And we're not great in terms of when we do feel out of control, or when we are in conditions of uncertainty, toggling between the two and dynamically integrating the two together. We feel like in an interaction with someone else, we either have to be the one who has all the answers and we're helping that other person, or instead we're that person who is asking for help and the other person is a mentor or a trusted individual and we're reaching out to them to sort of get something, an answer, resources, what have you. And we forget that in these sort of circumstances and in these situations, because this adversity is impacting us in lots of different ways, that one way to really connect with people is to have this mixture where we are simultaneously the mentee and the mentor, the person who needs advice and is providing advice. And the more we're able to do this, the more we're able to have connections and enable us to feel like we're not so isolated, because we don't feel like we have to play this singular flat role of either one or the other. And so a lot of that allows us to dynamically see opportunities, providing other people with opportunities and advice in a really holistic fashion.
You've written in Harvard Business Review before about leadership and about going with your gut. I'm interested here. We're talking a lot about information, either having too much unhelpful information or not enough, or all at the same time. How much can we just use our gut to get these decisions right, or to at least feel more calm and confident about the decisions we do need to make in the face of such uncertainty?
Yeah, gut feel is such an interesting one, because part of what makes, I mean, we often think that our gut feel is this like emotional, quick, subconscious thing that we need to control against, that we then need to like find the data to support what our intuition is. And in this situation, like, but it's especially in situations where there's this unknowable, like, even if we were able to gather data, that data to some extent is just hopes and dreams and guesses about what will happen. And so we can rely on that to some extent, but really when we're making decisions, the key here is to be honing our intuition in a sense that we know that in certain situations, it's better to be more analytical. In other situations, it's better to be more intuitive, and knowing the difference, because there are some situations where we want to be completely driven by the numbers. But in other situations, we want to sort of even chuck out the numbers and follow really what our experience and our prototypes and the exemplars that we have are. And so it really depends on where we are in our own personal journey, what it is we're trying to achieve. But all that to say is you can really hone your ability to know which instances to be more reliant on your intuition and which to not.
That's great. Renata in the stream here is saying it's a great comment that it's all about balance. It's all about collaborating with others. Mary says, thank you for your tip. She says she wants to buy your book. It's over her right shoulder, Mary, if you can see it. I also want to say hi to Melissa from Las Vegas, Melvin from New York, and Nellie from Texas. Thank you for joining us. We're here with Harvard Business School professor Laura Huang, talking about uncertainty and adversity. Laura, I want to ask you another question related back to experiences you've had with your research. There's got to be certain jobs, certain industries that are always dealing with uncertainty in more of the way that we're used to talking about it now than maybe we were 6 months ago. Any examples that we can learn from there?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and this is a great example that really makes it really concrete. Like, if we think about, for example, like restaurant, hospitality, we know that consumer preferences are changing all of the time, right? Things are changing. We have to dynamically improvise. We have to dynamically be able to sort of make shifts. So there are lots of different companies, lots of different industries that have to do this all the time. And what do they do, right? What are the things? So if you imagine, for example, like that small hole in the wall restaurant that you used to love, like you found this Italian restaurant and you keep going back to it because it had great bread and it had great pesto and great olive oil dip. And that's why you went to it. Well, as more people discovered this restaurant, they started expanding. They had restaurants in different cities. They added to their menu, all of these things. And then some people stopped going because the quality of their bread and their pesto went down. And they have to sort of figure out like what is happening here. But if they sort of stick to their basics and remember what those basics are, they can continue to build and expand. And this was what I sort of meant when I said you have to prune to grow. You can't be focusing on so many things all at once. And so there's lots of jobs and industries that we can take this example that we can sort of look at and say, like, they've been able to do this well, even when conditions change. They're able to let certain things go and focus on those things that are really the main things. As I sort of say, keep the main things, and then you can shift and plug in and plug out different things that are these lateral, more tangential kind of things. And so industries that are like small businesses, restaurants, hospitality, fast moving tech, fast moving consumer, these are all industries that we can look at to see how they're adjusting to these kinds of conditions.
That's great. I think that's nice that the advice is the same on an individual level or at the company level. This prune to grow, you keep telling us. Come back to what's really the basics, the core foundation, whether that's for an individual question or it's about the nature of your business. Come back to that when things are uncertain, stick to that stuff, and then that's going to help you through this time.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. The stream had a lot of great questions for you. Appreciated the advice you were sharing about how to navigate during this uncertain time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
And thank you for all your comments and questions today. This is Business Unusual, a live show from the LinkedIn News team coming to you from this page 5 days a week at noon Eastern. Please tune in tomorrow when my colleague Caroline Fairchild is going to be speaking with healthcare testing startup Everywell's founder Julia Cheek on how the company has ramped up production to meet the challenge of COVID-19 and what is next for them in the healthcare space. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you tomorrow.